Seems like a lot of people are curious about the housekeepers from the first post, so I'm going to get into them a bit more. This may be disappointing to those who want to welcome a housekeeper into their homes, but there is no way to predict how or why they pick certain places to inhabit. They tend to gravitate toward houses, barns, and apartments, though for whatever reason, they also lack shoemakers. Hypothetically, you could tempt a housekeeper by leaving a bowl of cream on your doorstep at night, but that also would attract any of the neighbors of the hills, some of which yins really don't want to mess with. I wouldn't risk it, no matter how much I hate doing dishes. In the case that someone's reading this and suddenly finds themselves with an unexpected, hairy house guest, I'll give you a brief overview on how to care for a housekeeper. I gave suggestions in the comments of my previous post, but I think it will be best to repeat them here for all to see. Housekeepers are only active at night. The first signs of a housekeeper infestation are that you may wake up one morning to find your entire house is spotless. Nice, right? For the most part, as long as you leave them some cream and maybe the occasional snack cake before you go to bed at night. They're not terrible roommates. As far as cream goes, they accept heavy whipping cream, half and half, full fat cow's milk, and whipped cream. However, it should be noted that if the housekeeper thinks you're too lazy, too slovenly, or they just plain get annoyed at your snoring one night, you may be awoken by a pinch on the bottom of your foot in the middle of the night. They're finicky little guys that are prone to mischief. So, that's how you keep a housekeeper happy. Not too difficult, right? Hell, I know people who've had housekeepers helping their families for generations. That's the best case scenario. Now, let's look at the factors that can cause a housekeeper to transform. There's outright refusing to reward them for their work. Honestly, that's fair. If I cleaned someone's entire house and they couldn't even be bothered to give me a cool, tasty drink afterward, I'd be a bit miffed myself. Another way that they can transform will be covered when I discuss the next atypical case. The first time I ever encountered a transformed housekeeper was during my second week at Orion Pestcontrol, which was roughly about 3 years ago. While that wasn't my first time encountering the unknown in my lifetime, it was my first atypical case while employed here. At that point, it was just the boss and I working at Orion. After spending the morning dealing with an especially nasty wasp infestation in an old warehouse, I got stung 4 times. We got another call. Victor put the phone on loudspeaker so that I could hear what I was in for. The client was terrified, telling her story through tears. While she was napping, she'd awake to a cold hand clutching her cheek. However, when she opened her eyes, no one was there. That's when someone or something she couldn't see grabbed her ankles and ripped her from the bed, tossing her against the wall as if she weighed nothing. "Do you have any salt at home, miss?" Victor asked her, not fazed by any of this. I, on the other hand, was equal parts excited and anxious to see what awaited us in this poor woman's apartment. She shakily told us that she did. He told her to draw a circle of salt around herself. It would keep the transformed housekeeper from getting close to her again until we could get there. During the drive, Victor broke the silence by saying, "You were in the military, you said?" He knew that when he hired me. Even so, I confirmed. "Yeah, that's right." "You remember your training well?" "I do." "Good. You'll need it." When we arrived at the client's address, we heard her scream. It was the kind of marrow-chilling shriek that haunts your nightmares. A desperate, animalistic sound you never want to hear another human being make. The boss hurriedly tried the front door, found it was locked, then promptly kicked it down. The client was cowering on the ground in a ball. A headless, stout body, covered in disheveled gray hair, loomed over her, arms raised as it reached for her. Its skin was wrinkled and loose, as if the body had belonged to a short, hairy old man. The only thing that separated the client from her tormentor was the circle of salt. There was shrill laughter in the corner of the room. The housekeeper's head. It was sitting on a table like a macabre centerpiece, its red eyes gleaming like twin flames as they cackled with glee. As the boss marched toward the body, he commanded me to get the head out of the house. Feeling the warmth of adrenaline creeping up my spine, I ran for the housekeeper's detached head. As I raced past the sofa, the furniture began to move on its own. My body reacted before my brain did, and I skidded to a stop on the wooden floor just as the sofa slammed into the wall next to me. I could hear a struggle behind me as Victor dealt with the housekeeper's body. The lights flickered maddeningly, making it difficult to see as I crossed the room. A vase flew off a shelf right at my face as if it was thrown. Shielding my head with my arms, I ducked, broken glass falling into my hair as the vase smashed above me. The head leered at me as my hands covered each of its pointed ears. I couldn't help but notice that its teeth looked sharper than a typical housekeeper's. I tucked it under my arm like a football as I turned to make a break for the door. A tornado of broken glass stood between me and the exit. I covered my eyes with my forearm, putting my head down. I almost dropped the housekeeper's head, catching it by the hair just before it could slip from my grasp, which it did not like. It had a lot of colorful things to say about me, but I was preoccupied as a shard of glass embedded itself into the back of my hand, another grazing the top of my left ear. Gritting my teeth against pain, I kept going. Pieces hit my work jacket, but couldn't get through the thick material. I was close. A shard stabbed me in the back of the thigh. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I somehow kept my balance and my grip on the housekeeper's hair, limping toward the door as warmth trickled down the back of my right leg. Once I got to the threshold, I swung my arm and lobbed the housekeeper's head like I was pitching a baseball, underhanded. As it soared through the air, it loudly swore at me one last time, its red eyes glaring at me as it landed, rolling to a stop. Footsteps behind me. I quickly backed away just as Victor wrestled the housekeeper's body across the threshold, sending it sprawling with a kick to its hairy, wrinkled chest. Not wasting any time, Victor drew a line of salt across the doorway. The moment the threshold was covered, the light stopped flickering. All of the glass flying around the room dropped noisily to the ground. I watched with widened eyes as the housekeeper's body ambled over to its head, delicately picked it up, wiped some dirt off its cheek, set it back on top of its neck. The housekeeper gave me one last toothy grin before it departed, whistling a tune only it knew. Warily, I gazed after it. expecting it to come back at any moment to finish what it had started. It didn't. Meanwhile, the client was in the throes of a full-scale panic attack, crying against Victor's chest. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else as he was uncomfortably patting her shoulder, trying not to bleed on her. Victor hadn't been spared by the broken glass the housekeeper had hocus-pocused at us. He silently grimaced as he pulled a piece out of his cheek. The glass had just barely missed his eye. His hands had numerous shallow, bloody lines across the backs of them. It's a good thing our company jackets are so thick. It could have gone way worse for us. I think the worst injury either of us got that day was one in the back of the thigh, but thankfully, it only needed a few stitches. Once the client had calmed down enough to speak, she admitted the grave mistake she'd made with the housekeeper. She'd given it a name. It was just a cutesy little nickname that I won't dare to repeat here. Using it will draw the transformed housekeeper back. The client had meant it to be endearing, but clearly the housekeeper didn't see things the same way. One thing to remember with housekeepers and with the other neighbors of the hills is that names have power. Asking for their names is akin to asking for their subservience. Likewise, they interpret the provision of a name, even a nickname, as an attempt to take power over them. In turn, if you give one of the neighbors your name, they'll own you. On my drive to work, I passed by a picturesque hawthorn tree that stands alone on top of a hill. During spring, white blossoms bloom, showering the hill in a blanket of pale petals. Just looking at it, you can tell that it's been there longer than Pennsylvania has been a state. It stands proudly enough that you can be assured that it'll still be on that hill long after most of us have left this mortal coil. And then 2 stupid kids carved their name into it. One of them ending up calling us, his voice quaking in terror. "I don't know if you can help me, but I've been hearing laughing everywhere I go. In my head. They're in my head. Can you get it out?" The hardness in the boss's voice surprised me. "What did you do?" I tried to whisper to him. "Victor." He silenced me by raising a finger. "The neighbors don't come after people who do nothing. What did you do?" When the boy tearfully admitted to carving his and his girlfriend's name into the hawthorn tree between sobs, Victor sighed deeply, blood draining from his face as he said, "We can't help you. I'm sorry." My blood ran cold. He couldn't be serious. This was a kid. He couldn't have been older than 21. "What?" I hissed in disbelief. Victor gave me a warning look, silently telling me to shut my mouth. That's when the music started. It was coming from the other end of the line, a stringed instrument, playing softly. Was that a banjo? Could banjo sound like that? So mesmerizing? My hair stood up on my neck and arms as the melody continued. Victor also noticeably stiffened. The kid's voice changed. The fear suddenly gone. It was now dreamy and wistful as he breathed. "What?" "Yeah, I will. I will." The line went dead. Back then, I hadn't understood at first. I didn't have the knowledge that I do now. I screamed at Victor, demanding to know why we were sitting by as something happened to that kid. To Victor's credit, he remained calm and patient as he explained. That boy was dead the moment he touched that tree. We can't do anything for him. So we're just gonna, what, let him die? I argued. If we interfere, we'll join, Victor muttered as if he were concerned that someone would overhear. That made my protests stop. With another heavy sigh, Victor continued. One thing you need to understand. If you're going to work here is that we're not heroes. We're pest control specialists. That's it. He pointed at the phone. That music you heard? Housekeepers are one thing, but that is something way out of our league. That is something that'll turn you inside out for looking at it the wrong way. That is something that used to be a god, and it hasn't forgotten. As he spoke, I stared at the phone as the music played on loop in the back of my mind, equally as haunting as it was enchanting. When I tried to sleep that night, I kept hearing it. I think that the neighbor who'd come to find the boy had intended that when it interrupted our phone call. It was a warning, a reminder to Orion to know our place. On the morning after the boy was taken, I saw what happened to him on my way to work. I wish I hadn't. I should have just kept driving. Spared myself some more sleepless nights. But when I saw the blossoms stained red and pink, I felt my heart drop. I tipped off the sheriff as I navigated my car to the side of the road, snatching my tool belt off of the passenger seat before I walked the rest of the way toward the Hawthorne. If I was going to be stupid enough to investigate, I was at least going to be armed. When I reached the tree, I discovered that the neighbors didn't just come after the boy. They came for the girl, whose name he carved into the bark, too. The hawthorn looked like a grotesque mockery of a Christmas tree. Intestines were woven along the branches like garland. The girl's head hung from a low branch, her dark hair wrapped in a neat knot around the tree's limb. Her face was stuck permanently in what appeared, disturbingly enough, to be euphoria. The boy's head was impaled on the end of another branch, wearing a similar expression of off-putting bliss. Both of their beheaded bodies lay like discarded, broken dolls on opposite sides of the hill, their torsos opened from groin to throat. Their hearts were placed next to each other at the base of the tree, right under where they'd written their names. What's strange is that when this moment haunts my dreams, I don't see bodies, just the tree with its reddened petals. We've never figured out which of the neighbors was responsible. Not that it would matter, since there's nothing we can do about it. To this day, thankfully, we haven't received any other calls about hypnotic music or laughter echoing in someone's mind. Probably because after that incident, nobody dares to go near that hawthorn. It has since earned the macabre nickname, the Lover's Tree. After that phone call, I learned a couple of hard lessons. The first being that we can't help everyone. Like the boss said, we're pest control experts, not heroes. That being said, I still try when I can. I have to. The second lesson was that the neighbors are like the damn mafia in the sense that you don't want them knowing who you are. It's because of lesson 2 that I refuse to give the town mechanic my name. To be clear, though, I don't know for sure if the mechanic is one of the neighbors, but there's something about him that's just a bit off. I'll admit that he's probably one of the most attractive men I've ever seen in my life. Normally, good old boys are my type. especially when they're covered in motor oil more often than they aren't. But it's hard to deny that he's stunning. His eyes break the illusion, though. They're too knowing, too confident. The eyes of someone much older than he appears. The eyes of someone who can see all of the darkest corners of your being with only a glance. I try not to look directly into them, if I can help it. The worst part is that he's the only mechanic for miles. Unless we want to get charged through the nose by the scam artists at the dealership in the next town over. He also gives Orion and its employees a good deal for being a small, local business. Avoiding him isn't exactly an option, no matter how untrustworthy he is. This encounter happened just last week, on the 3-year anniversary of the young couple being found at the hawthorn tree. "Hey there, stranger." The mechanic always greets me with a boyish grin that would be charming if it weren't for those eyes. Despite my unease around him, I'm always polite. Manners are important to the neighbors. "I would like an oil change, please, for the company truck." Still smiling, the mechanic informed me that it would be about an hour. Just as I turned to go kill time, he casually said, "So, how's old Blue Eyes?" He was looking kind of rough the last time I saw him. That's his nickname for Victor. Suffice to say that the boss hasn't shared his name with the mechanic either. We've advised Raina to do the same. Swallowing back my discomfort, I replied, "Oh, he's just a bit sick is all. Nothing major." The mechanic raised his eyebrow, thoughtfully wiping at some old gunk that had gotten into his forearm. Hope he hasn't fallen back into bad habits." "He hasn't." I cut myself off. How did he know about Victor's past? He shrugged and said mildly, "Not trying to pry. Just saw the marks on his arms, is all." I nodded. That's what it was. He saw the scars. That's what I was going to tell myself until I could get away from the mechanic, anyway. After a beat, I replied, "No, he's okay. He's been clean for going on 4 years now." Wait, why did I tell him that? Oh, he looked into my eyes. I quickly diverted him, hoping he didn't see anything else in me. I don't know why he was suddenly curious about the boss, but I don't imagine that it was out of heartfelt concern. The mechanic's smile was deceptively friendly. Good for him. From what I can tell, that shit's hard to kick. I left before the mechanic could catch my eye again. The mechanic called after me that he'd see me in an hour. It might have been my imagination, but I think he was taunting me. On the topic of the boss, Victor still hasn't told me what's up with him. I'm not the only one that's concerned. Raina stopped and looked at him the one day before asking, "So, are you like a vampire?" "Vitamin D deficiency," he replied flatly. She stared at him. "Bruh, how do we know that bandana isn't covering up bite marks?" I challenged. That earned me a frosty glare. Boss already had an intimidating gaze to begin with, but with the harsh circles under his eyes and sickly complexion, he looked even more imposing than usual. Unfortunately for him, I've known him for so long that it doesn't have much effect on me. "Go on," I urged him. "Prove us wrong." "Don't you have some work you could be doing? Any more worm infestations, he retorted. I rest my case. How do I know you don't have worms? The wildlife guys were worried it could get into people, you know. Nessa. His tone had the same threatening edge to it that my mother's used to have when I was about to find myself in trouble. Or, as is the case at Orion, being on worm duty the next time we got a call about it. Yeah. Fully prepared to face the wormy goodness that lied in my future, I decided it was more important to figure out what was going on with him. He's not just my boss, he's my friend. I'm worried about you, I said gently. In turn, he softened a bit. Don't. I'm not infected. I haven't fallen off the wagon, and I'm not fixing to drink either of you two's blood. That's all I can say. That made my ears perk up. All he could say. Before either Raina or I could say another word, he retreated into his office. She and I exchanged a glance. With a skeptical furrow of her brow, Raina whispered, I can't help but notice that he didn't confirm or deny being a vampire. We're going to be keeping an eye on the boss. If something or someone is keeping him from telling us about whatever is going on with him, we have to diagnose the issue ourselves. But before we could speculate about anything besides potential vampirism, the phone rang. Raccoons got into someone's attic. Back to business for now. In the meantime, if there are any questions that yins have about the housekeepers, feel free to ask. That's what I'm here for. When I'm not chasing bastard raccoons around someone's attic, of course.